Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session, COP29 Reflections and Takeaways. I'm Grace Henry, the Director of Projects at Island Innovation, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for this reflective session. Joining us on this panel is James Elsmore, CEO of Island Innovation, Ariana Abdul Noor, Project Manager, Michaela Johnson, Business Associate, also at Island Innovation. And from the Caribbean Climate Justice Leaders Academy, CCJLA, we have Tyrell Gittens from Trinidad and Tobago, Noel Young from Bermuda, and Nigel Maduro from Aruba. Motion detected in the car. Although COP29 has concluded, we are here to explore its key outcomes for island nations and discuss actionable insights. I encourage everyone to use the chat function to introduce yourselves and share where you're joining from and any initial thoughts. All right, before we begin, please look out for a quick poll appearing on your screen now. We'd love to hear more about who's here today, including your gender, location, and of course, sector or industry. And while we wait for the poll, let us see who is in the chat and where our audience is joining from. In the chat, let's see. All right. Wow, we have so many persons here. Someone from India, Belize, Bermuda, UK. Wow, Nigeria, Philippines. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope I didn't miss anyone from Kenya as well. Thank you so much for joining. All right. So feel free to add any thoughts or comments throughout the session. A quick note about logistics. During the session, all attendees will remain muted with cameras off, but we want to hear from you. If you have questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A function so we can address as many as possible during the Q&A segment of this session. When submitting questions, don't forget to include your name and country and let us know which panelist your question is for. So let's take a moment to review the poll results and see who is joining us today. All right, we have a wonderful mix here today. We see persons from Europe, majority from the Caribbean, North America, Africa, Middle East, and Asia. Wow, and we have representative from the sector, private sector, government, academia, and NGO. Wonderful to have you here. And from the industries, we have more persons joining from the environmental services and management consulting. So happy to have you here wherever you are joining from. All right. To kick off our discussion, we'll hear from panelists representing Island Innovation. Each will share unique reflections on COP29 based on their area of expertise and on-the-ground experience. So let's begin with James. James, subnational island jurisdictions often face unique challenges in gaining representation on the global stage. From your perspective, how were SNIJs, represented at COP29, and what does this mean for their future engagement in climate action?
Hi, Grace, and hi, everyone. Thank you for this session. I think we've just about recovered from COP. It was a very intense 2 and a bit weeks in Baku, but very exhilarating and a lot of progress was made. And I'll talk specifically about your question about our work with subnational island jurisdictions. But I just wanted to reflect on the wider news because we've all heard about the news that came in about funding made available for climate adaptation. And I think, we're always going to hear the criticism of COP, and COP is never going to be enough. It's never going to give us everything that could be needed. But I think it's also important to reflect on some of the progress that did come out, and getting close to 200 parties together to try and agree on anything is pretty remarkable that this progress even happened. So I always want to think about, from the negotiations themselves, some of the progress that was made, despite the fact that it's never quite where we want it to be. Island Innovation, we did a lot of work this time, specifically looking at how islands are adapting to climate change and what funding is available for that. And so within the COP process, the small island developing states are the countries that have a seat at the table when they're the UN member countries. But there are many other island regions that don't have that seat at the table. And so actually, the negotiations at COP at the end of the day don't really apply to them. And so we had several events, several sessions, bringing together um, delegates to discuss what other channels of funding exist for these so-called subnational island jurisdictions. And I see people in the chat from Curacao, from Aruba, from the Canary Islands, from Bermuda. So all of the Azores, so all of these places that are island regions that in the UN system fall in the responsibility of a larger country. And so that creates challenges when looking at how they get involved in this process. Um, and there is increasing recognition. We co-organized events both in the UK Pavilion, focused on the UK overseas territories, and also in the Benelux Pavilion with the Dutch government to look at the specific issues of the Dutch Caribbean when it comes to climate financing. But what quickly became apparent was that there were many, many other subnational island jurisdictions from around the world that were struggling with these same challenges, from islands like Nevis and Tobago in the Caribbean, Zanzibar, which is part of Tanzania in Africa, but also, as I mentioned, the Canary Islands and Tasmania, a whole range of different places that were looking at how did they adapt to climate change and also figuring out where they fall in this system, in this climate change system, as they are on the front lines, but they're not necessarily directly represented. And so our team really used COP, I think, quite powerfully. I was very proud of the Island Innovation team on the ground, using this to organize various bilateral meetings, various events with the different delegations of island nations and regions. And I think we counted about 30 or so meetings that we organized with the different islands that were represented there, with the goal of building a coalition on climate finance for subnational island jurisdictions. And so going into the Global Sustainable Island Summit in May, and hopefully, Grace, you'll be talking about that a bit more in the future, but being held in St. Kitts and Nevis, we will be bringing together a specific coalition, not just to represent the small island states, but also the subnational island regions, and ensuring that they have a voice on the global stage, because we know that in the COP process, when they're represented by their often faraway capitals, their interests are not always taken into account, and we want to really bring them together. So that was a specific area that Island Innovation worked on. I'll hand back to you, Grace, to bring in some of the other points from other people. And looking forward to discussing everything that came out of COP.
Sure. Thank you so much, James, for providing such clear picture of the challenges that SNIGs face. And it was good to see how island innovation played a role in facilitating the conversation that was really necessary. All right, so next we'll hear from Ariana Abdul Noor, Project Manager at Island Innovation. Ariana, civil society often plays a critical role at COP, even in the face of challenging negotiation outcomes. Can you share your thoughts on the value of COP for civil society, particularly the opportunities it creates for young people?
Thank you, Grace, and thank you, James, for setting me up nicely. As many of you will be familiar, and as James touched upon, COP sort of continually highlights the complex and often frustrating nature of international negotiations, with slow bureaucracy on critical issues like loss and damage, financing, and emission reduction targets. And while understandably this has left many questioning the urgency and the ambition of global climate action, and while many people back at home who haven't been able to attend COP in person have expressed to me sort of how effective is this process really, and effectively why do we bother keeping on engaging? For me, COP continues to serve as a crucial platform for civil society, so amplifying marginalized voices, driving grassroots advocacy, and fostering opportunities for transformative change. As someone who works closely with our wonderful young leaders through the Caribbean Climate Justice Leaders Academy, I've witnessed firsthand how platforms like COP are able to empower the next generation. And the way that I look at it is something that James actually touched upon in one of his panels at COP, and it's the power of the quadruple helix model, which refers to collaboration between the four key sectors, so government, academia, industry, and civil society. And the last 2 years, it's been the civil society aspect that's really stood out for me. With COP in Dubai, COP28 being my first ever COP, the most memorable part for me is something that I've discussed before, but it really did stick with me. And it's when part of our delegation met with delegates from Tuvalu, who are from the Global Center of Climate Mobility Rising Nations Initiative, who are due to be the first digital nation in the world. So effectively, digitally backing up everything from their houses to their trees and understanding how this impacts them. And while our delegates in the Caribbean don't have that same imminent threat that their islands are going to be underwater effectively by 2050, their challenges are the same and their vulnerabilities are the same. And effectively, if we don't adapt and we don't sort of mitigate and channel funding into the right sources, then they'll have the same fate. So it was a really, really powerful conversation, just a really casual one, kind of over coffee, not in the negotiating rooms, that allowed them to share resources and share ideas. And this year we had very similar interactions. And something that actually I enjoyed developing on this year was not just interacting with small island developing states, but learning from other countries. So, for example, one of our sessions was at the Climate Mobility Pavilion, and some of our delegates were on a panel with someone from Ghana, from the Africa Mobility Initiative, who was able to draw parallels between climate mobility challenges in their country and show us how the vulnerabilities again and the context was similar, despite not being by the ocean and having rising sea levels as part of a factor that affects them. And it was really important to understand how they're working in their communities on youth advocacy projects and how our delegates could take that away, and hopefully delegates and other young people in the audience as well. And something else I liked this year, it's sort of in the civil society aspect and kind of part of the pavilions and not the negotiations, is how physically connected all the pavilions were sort of in the expo building. You had England, the UK opposite Singapore, opposite Zimbabwe, and it meant that the conversations engagement were really fluid, which isn't always the case in negotiating rooms where you have to kind of stick to your text and stick to your seat. And as we look to expand our connections to other island regions, other countries, it was incredibly valuable both for our team and also for our delegates to have that kind of physical fluidity. Um, and so I could speak forever about sort of why I found COP really valuable, but I just wanted to end by saying that despite the challenges and setbacks in the negotiations, which we're all aware of, and especially in the context of islands, I just wanted to reiterate that COP for me remains a beacon of hope and possibility, and a space where civil society can really push boundaries, can forge connections, and drive the change that we obviously, very desperately need. And it's a reminder that while global agreements may falter, the collective of power of people and communities continues to shape a more just and sustainable future. So I'm really looking forward to carrying the momentum forward together, and very, very proud of our delegation and our team for what they achieved this year. Thank you, Grace. Back to you.
Thank you, Ari. It's very special how COP can really amplify the voices that needs to be heard. And you mentioned the synergy and the collaboration where the pavilions were concerned, and how those collaborations and knowledge sharing is important in bringing these voices together. So, building on the theme of collaboration and opportunity, our final speaker in this segment is Michaela Johnson, Business Associate at Island Innovation, and she will delve into how COP serves as a platform for island communities to collaborate and share knowledge. Michaela, we're eager to hear your reflections.
Thank you, Grace. I'm really excited to be here today to reflect on COP29. This was actually my first COP, and to be honest, going into it, I didn't really know what to expect. But when I arrived and I started to navigate the Blue Zone, I think the energy there was very inspiring. It was hopeful. It was passionate. It was really inspiring seeing all of these different side events and discussions happening simultaneously. all on a wide range of topics, but there was a common ground. There was an overarching theme of hope and sustainability. And similar to what Ariana mentioned, I think COPs are not just conferences, they are critical platforms where the voices of the most vulnerable can resonate globally. And I think that these events present a unique opportunity to drive meaningful impact and really foster collaboration. As James mentioned, our team, we had many bilateral meetings and very insightful conversations with representatives from islands globally. And it was great to be able to hear different perspectives and hear about the challenges facing different islands and seeing that common ground that we're working towards. And I think these events really provide a space to advocate for the tailored solutions and remind the world that our challenges, though severe, are not insurmountable, and there's still the opportunity and the need for action. One thing that really stood out to me at this COP, as I mentioned, the discussions being had, it really highlighted the similarities in the issues that islands are facing. And it emphasized for me the need for collaboration, both regionally and internationally as islands. And it was inspiring to see the collaborations taking place, the diversity in the nations represented on the panels and in these discussions. I was able to moderate an interactive workshop with some of our CCJLA participants, and we were able to be in a room together and brainstorm and discuss solutions for coastal resilience for coastal communities globally. And it was really interesting because our panel represented different Caribbean islands. Each of our panelists was from a different island, and we were also able to hear perspectives from different islands and countries from the audience. And it was really interesting just being in that room and hearing all of the similarities and hearing solutions that are being implemented on other islands and seeing how we can implement that back home. So I think I left that session very proud of our CCJLA participants and seeing them partake in these crucial conversations and seeing other youth there present at COP as well, speaking on behalf of their countries. And I think along with collaboration comes the opportunity for knowledge sharing. So it's important for SIDS and island communities to really learn from each other, to learn what others are doing and what we can do in terms of climate resilience and adaptation. And I think that overall, though there are criticisms and though there is definitely room for improvement in terms of representation at COP, I think that COP proves to be a great place for nations to collaborate and to knowledge share. And I am looking forward to COP30 next year. Back to you, Grace.
Thank you, Michaela, for highlighting the importance of collaboration. Of course, COP is it really presents a unique opportunity for island communities. And you mentioned the theme of hope and sustainability throughout your experience at COP. And I think COP, presents this critical platform, which presents a unique opportunity for us to foster collaboration and also to continue the knowledge sharing. Because, of course, if an island is experiencing an issue and has found a solution, it's no need for us to reinvent the wheel, but rather to see how we can improve and implement. So, of course, together, these reflections provide a comprehensive view of COP29 impact and lessons for the future. So now we're going to turn our attention to the participants of the Caribbean Climate Justice Leaders Academy who attended COP29, who will give a very brief introduction into what they do and also share their unique perspectives as youth advocates from the Caribbean. For those of us who don't know about the CCJLA program, it's put on by Island Innovation, and it's a unique opportunity for young Caribbean environmental advocates and community leaders to learn about climate justice while engaging with global policymakers and promote climate action. So, Tyrell, we will start with you. Could you share your key takeaways and outcome for the Caribbean, especially in terms of youth engagement and advocacy?
Hi, good day, everyone. Firstly, thank you very much for taking the time to be here today and to listen to our perspectives as young people and the Island Innovation team. I would firstly like to start by saying thank you very much to Island Innovation for the Caribbean Climate Justice Leaders Academy. I think, as all of us are aware, COPs and these spaces haven't always been inclusive or accessible to young people, particularly from the global south. So I think it's very commendable and it's important to recognize when organizations are making the effort to ensure that young people, particularly from island communities and the global south, continue to have access to these decision-making spaces, which will ultimately um, create policies, discussions, and decisions that will affect our very existence. Being at COP29, I think is very eye-opening as a young person. This was my first climate COP. So it was, I think, interesting to get a feel of how the atmosphere is, how the negotiations proceed, how different stakeholders approach the space. As a young person there, I was able to firstly build a lot of connections with other islanders, just not from the Caribbean, but from other regions around the world. I would have, had a lot of discussions with um, people from Southeast Asia or the Pacific, for example, or even South America. So it was interesting to have these discussions to share perspectives about how climate change is, shaping our realities, but not only shaping our realities, how our different journeys are interacting with our decision makers and how we could really improve on that. At COP, I think we also had a lot of reflective decisions about the space and how it operates. We know that, there will be very important decision of the $300 billion goal. But I think we have had discussions at COP about how we could ensure that these goals are translated to action because, something with these spaces have been traditionally decisions have been made, such as the $100 billion goals, and global north countries have not necessarily um, stuck to their commitments or lived up to it. So I think we had a lot of discussions about how we as civil society, as young people could, effectively participate in the process and contribute towards actions. There's a lot of knowledge sharing. I think I would have learned a lot from my fellow CCGLA champions, as I like to call them, from some of the panels. We would have sat on learning about the lived experiences of everyone. We would have had Indigenous young people from the Caribbean, from Aruba and Dominica, sharing their experiences and how climate change shaped their realities and how, being perhaps territories of other countries, that relationship between um, countries and their territories and so on. So I think it was a learning experience and it was definitely an opportunity as a young person to be inspired and motivated to return to Trinidad and Tobago and continue my climate advocacy and continue some of the climate projects that I'm involved in, but not only continue what I'm doing now, look for ways to build on what I'm doing, look to form new connections with some of the people I've met around the world. My final point would be we are, all not connected because of different oceans and so on. But when you come at COP29, you really get a true sense that there are many different people from many different backgrounds, really working towards a common goal in many different ways. And I guess you get an idea of the role that you play in that larger picture and how we can really support each other because as island nations, as regions, we don't make up um, as much land mass. Or our economies may not be as strong as some of the global north, but when we really put our voices together, we see how we can have a real impact in negotiations and really, tilting the discussions. And I wouldn't say in our favor, but in a direction that recognize our realities and what sustainable action is needed. So back to you, Grace, and again, thanks for the opportunity to have this platform to communicate these perspectives.
Thank you, Tyrell, for sharing those powerful reflections and the role of youth in driving climate action. A key takeaway from what you shared is that we must move from goals to action in our home country, whether by starting something impactful or improving on an initiative that is already existing. So, next we have Noel Young from Bermuda. Noel? As the only representative from Bermuda at COP29, you had a unique experience. How did that shape your perspective, and what do you think it means for the future of climate advocacy for others like yourself?
Well, I'd say that representing Bermuda at COP is very interesting. As the only person from my small island nation, it was an incredible and very eye-opening experience. As a subnational island jurisdiction of the UK, Bermuda is often underrepresented on the global stage. So it felt like both an honor and a really heavy responsibility to carry Bermuda's flag and share our unique challenges and perspectives. This was my first time participating in like high level conversations and discussions on a global scale. And I'll admit that I myself struggled with imposter syndrome. You know, I was sitting on panels with experts and leaders from around the world, and it kind of made me question if I belonged there. And that feeling kind of deepened for me with an experience that I had when I was asked to leave a negotiation room. It actually happened twice. Because of my status at COP, I was an observer. I was not a party member. So that just kind of further kind of deepened that imposter syndrome that I had. And it was a stark reminder of how structural barriers can really limit the representation for smaller island nations and jurisdictions. But the positive experiences at COP far outweighed the challenges that I had. You know, I was able to connect with advocates, with diplomats, and leaders from diverse backgrounds. And that just really expanded my network further and opened the doors for future collaborations. And the connections offered a lot of new insights. I was educated at COP. I learned so much. And, you know, there were lots of opportunities for things that I could bring back to my own island to make suggestions to my government for the benefit of Bermuda. And I received a lot of support. I really did. I received support, number one, from my dad. So my father actually came to COP. He enabled me to come by agreeing to look after my 3-year-old son. And then Island Innovation, their team offered endless encouragement and practical advice, as well as connections to different advocates and government leaders. And they really did remind me of the importance of my voice and my perspective and to really get that information out there. Support also came from Bermuda itself. I actually received a letter from my governor on like the second week of COP, with her just kind of providing words of support as the only Bermudian there, and you know, just really asking me to strengthen my voice and to continue going. Azerbaijan also was really interesting, like being in the country itself and experiencing their culture. The country's infrastructure is really thoughtfully designed to allow everyone, regardless of their age or ability, to live independently and thrive. As a person with a visual disability, I thought that was really interesting. And I was inspired to see how their society itself really prioritized accessibility to everyone on an individual level. There were things like, you know, escalators everywhere, wheelchair ramps, changing tables for moms in bathrooms, mini toilets for kids, braille signage, and just a lot of other things that I wasn't used to seeing on a daily basis in, you know, in every building. So being in Azerbaijan itself was an experience. And I'd say that, again, the overall experience highlighted the gaps that we have in Bermuda, particularly in accessibility and inclusivity. But it gave me a lot of fresh ideas to bring back home, and I plan to make a lot of good suggestions about the concepts that I learned to our Human Rights Commission to hopefully improve the quality of life of people in Bermuda. But I'd say that like overall my experience really did give me a renewed sense of confidence and clarity about why it's so important to amplify the voices of small island nations and subnational jurisdictions. Bermuda is a really tight-knit community, so it can sometimes bring criticism your way if you speak out. But I've learned again that through a lot of the stories from people at COP and their solutions, that you really can inspire meaningful change on the global stage, not just within your national jurisdiction. And again, just kind of looking ahead, it just further, ensured my commitment to have a present at further COPs, and further global discussions. And I've already encouraged other youth from Bermuda to apply to the Island Innovation Program so that hopefully I'm not the first and last Bermudian to attend a COP. And again, I really just want to thank the Island Innovation team because you guys made such a difference and what you guys do is amazing. And I don't know how you managed to organize everyone together because I know it was like herding cats into a bag, but bravo to you and thanks again.
Thank you, Noah, for sharing your journey and just your reflections. Your experience as Bermuda's sole representative at COP is truly inspiring. Overcoming imposter syndrome to stand strong for both the cause and your country is a powerful testament to your commitment and resilience. You set a remarkable example for future advocates, so keep going. All right. So Emanuela from the chat expressed thanks to Island Innovation for being a beacon of hope. Please keep the chat going and use the Q&A function to pose any questions to our panelists. So finally, let's hear from Nigel Maduro from Aruba, an indigenous rights advocate. Nigel, what were your key observations on elevating Caribbean and indigenous voices and the role of youth at COP?
Hi everyone, thank you for having me here, Grace, and the people from Island Innovations. I really appreciate it. My name is Naja Maduro. I think being at COP itself was a wonderful opportunity for me because it got me a platform for me to represent my small island of Aruba on an international high-level conference as well. So I was very grateful for that. Also, I think what I had in terms of my experience was very overwhelming in terms of like all the opportunities and people that I was meeting all at once during that week that I was there, but also overwhelming in the sense that there were so many collaborations, spaces for us to work together and build connections across, yeah, just other nations across the world. And I think that was a really important takeaway for me. I think also just learning from everyone, just being like a sponge and soaking it all in. I think that was something that I really, really appreciated while being there. I learned a lot from other organizations or other smaller island nations or even larger nations that had their own way of climate adaptation and climate mitigation. And I think for example, for me, I remember me and Noel actually we went to the Palau pavilion and then we were learning a lot about how Palauans deal with climate change or waste management and them being a very small island nation state themselves. It's us learning from each other. And I think by being at COP was a great opportunity for us to learn from each other and share stories that otherwise we would never ever hear about people from Palau, for example. And I think also being there, I was the only youth representative from the Dutch Caribbean islands that I know of. That just being there, having my voice there, and advocating for climate justice and indigenous people's rights, and also just me standing up for what's happening back home and telling stories about what's happening back home was just amazing in itself because then I could share my stories as well and let others be inspired as well by the work that we're doing here in the Caribbean islands as well. So I think that was something that I really appreciate as well. Just having a seat at the table, but also serving food at the table as well, just allowing people to be more aware about what's happening back home and teaching them about how I deal with it as well and how my people adapt or mitigate it. I think that was also something that was super nice. I think something that was very inspiring is that, you know, if I was never invited to these spaces through the Island Innovations platform, I would have never met some organizations that right now I'm currently building a partnership with to take back home. So I think that was something that I really was happy about because otherwise I would have never known about specific organizations or just the people there as well. I think building potential partnerships and bringing them to my island is like such an amazing thing because otherwise I would have never found out about them. And I think having such a strong core team as well, the Island Innovations and the other people from the cohort from the Caribbean Climate Justice Leaders Academy, I think they really inspired me as well because I see them being inspired and also motivated to meet new people and also build partnerships and in joining sessions. I think that's also something that I saw the people around me being motivated and it also motivated me so much to just keep pushing because the week was very hectic in itself. It was just a lot of up and down, a lot of energy consumption, a lot of social battery running out. So having that really strong support system around me through the Island Innovations team and the Caribbean Climate Justice Leaders Academy cohort, I think they kept me going as well for the week because I would usually get really overwhelmed with those type of things, but they kept me grounded. I think also another takeaway that I got from this is that I have a sense of unity and a sense of collectiveness when I was there. So I spent most of the time in either speaking with people from smaller island nation states or also speaking with other indigenous peoples around the world. And whenever they would share their stories, I could instantly connect with it because it's also similar back home for me and in my fight and in my yeah, the way I am working as well back home. So it's finding these similarities and also being having the sense of togetherness as well is really something that I really appreciated and was really grateful for because yeah, just over there, you could see the land defenders themselves talking about how they do it. You see activists or advocates talking and explaining how they manage and how they go about being in these spaces. And it just creates a sense of collectivity that we are all in this together. And essentially, we all have to deal with climate change together as well. So I think the unity, the togetherness, and the collective vision on where we want to go is something that I really appreciated being there. And I think something also that I take away from being at COP was that um, so I'm an island boy. I like peaceful settings, very like low stimuli settings. But being there was very overwhelming for me and being around a lot of business people walking up and down, a lot of uh, leaders going around me and me being overwhelmed with such, yeah, just the setting in itself is it just made me hyper aware about my advocacy that I'm doing for my island. And kind of like Noel said, it's just, it's an added pressure, but it's also an added like sense of pride that you are representing your island. And to be in that space, to represent my small island, it was like, okay, I'm here now. I could talk about what's happening back home, but also I could hang with the top dogs around cops. So I think that was something that just made me very much aware about me being an islander and me being in those spaces, in those high level conferences, in those spaces where I do belong here and I do have a specific voice that is meant to be heard. And I think just the advocacy work and the activism work that I also did there was spectacular because it was just an opportunity for me to amplify the voices of what's happening back home in the Caribbean. But you could also see the similarities of Caribbean islands and Pacific islands, and it's just like, you're using your collective voice for other island nation states too. So I think that was something that really kept me going as well because throughout the entire event, I was just thinking about, the collective vision on where we want to go and how do we take these voices from different small island nations together and how do we amplify them. So I think, yeah, just overall being for me, it was it was a wonderful experience, overwhelming, very overwhelming, but I just had my support system with me and people that kept motivating me throughout the entire journey. So I really appreciate it. Special shout out to Whitney as well. Whitney is another fellow Indigenous Caribbean Kalinago, from the Kalinago tribe. She was basically also my rock. We were walking back and forth, like representing Indigenous Caribbean people as well, which there's still a lack of representation in regards to Indigenous Caribbean people over there at COP. So me and her dream team just walking up and down the meeting rooms and speaking on behalf of Indigenous Caribbean people and telling our cosmology and spirituality stories and how we are deeply connected with the land and environment and climate. I think it gave another perspective on how do we move forward and how do we keep including Indigenous Caribbean voices in these spaces as well, which are often misrepresented or underrepresented. So again, shout out to Whitney who is in the chat as well. I really appreciate you. And yeah, I think looking forward, just bringing things back home, the organizations and partnerships that, I got to know and network with, I'll bring it back home. I usually call these friend making events because they're my friends now. So I'm gonna help them and then they help me and just like friendship type. And also just the networks across the globe. I think that's something that I really appreciate. And yeah, I think right now the work is not finished. It just started. COP was just a mere stepping stone for me and I believe for other Caribbean people that also joined the academy. And it's something that I really appreciate that we we had the space, we had the platform, we had the area to go around, explore, build partnerships and just connections across the globe and show how connected and interconnected this entire complex issue of climate change actually is. So I think, yeah, those are my main takeaways. And again, gratitude will forever be in my heart. There's a special place for my people from Island Innovation and the cohort as well. So I appreciate each and every one of you. And yeah, just these memories will keep pushing me forward in fighting for climate justice and land rights as well, and Indigenous people's rights. So thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Nigel, for emphasizing the importance of Indigenous perspectives and youth leadership. Um, it it really also was my first experience at COP, and it's funny how the thinking have changed from thinking, government should have the solutions to all these issues, but also we as civil society, we as individuals also have an opportunity to present solutions because in our solutions and in our conversations with other individuals, we can also bring about these solutions and bring hope. So, thank you to all our speakers for their insights. Now we will transition to the moderated discussion and the audience Q&A. Let me see if there are any questions. Not at this time. Nevertheless, we'll continue. Um, to all our panelists, just give us one inspiring moment that you encountered at COP29. And we'll start with James and go in the order that you presented.
one inspiring moment is hard. And let's have everyone on screen at the same time if we can. Going to the panel, great. Because there were many. I mean, it was a roller coaster, as some of the panelists said. High points and low points, and I can see in the chat there was some people's, skepticism of the COP process, which I think is perfectly valid, and I think we should critique the process. But I think also, I mean, you've seen three here, Nigel, Tyrell, and Noel, this amazing group, but there was a wider group of individuals as well as other youth taking part there as well. And I think in those 2 weeks, seeing um, the, I guess, opportunities that all of the youth cohort dived into and really took advantage of, and in some cases the confidence that was built and the future partnerships that kind of came out of that, I think was something that was really inspiring.
All right. Thanks, James.
While there's many inspiring things, this one's quite an easy one for me. And I think it was witnessing the young leaders from the academy and also from our team stepping into global conversations with confidence and purpose. In the lead up to COP, I was arranging kind of side events, and I was like, guys, who wants to speak? Come on. You have really important things to say. And everyone was a little bit shy or busy, and there's lots of moving parts. And then as soon as they were on the first panel, they were wanting to go to every pavilion and see where they could speak and contribute their ideas. And so to see that transition and to be a part of that, even though they did all the hard work, to kind of be alongside them in parallel, seeing them grow was really the proudest moment for me. So huge congratulations to all of you for that.
Great. Michaela.
I think for me, similarly, it was seeing island representation and Caribbean representation. And prior to COP, I hadn't heard the CCJLA participants speak. So going there and seeing them in person, and as soon as they got on the stage, and they just fit right in. They had these powerful messages and these stories, and I think it was really inspiring to see them and also other youth from the Caribbean present at COP.
And I will just add my most inspiring moment as well. It was just being there to support the team. Noel, you were so inspiring, and it was a pleasure just, having a moment with you. Um, everyone may be wondering what was that moment. She spoke about the imposter syndrome, and somehow, even though I am overcome with that sometimes, I was able to inspire her to just continue on her journey. All right. So, James, I still haven't seen any more questions in the Q&A from the audience, but how effectively do you think the voices of island nations were amplified during COP29? And was there any other way that things could have been done?
I think this year, I mean, if we're comparing previous COPs, there was a much smaller presence of island representatives, in partly due to the location and the challenges around this year's specific COP. Last year in Dubai, from the Caribbean, for example, there was a huge representation, also from the Pacific, and part of that was due to funding availability for people to be there. That's always a challenge. Next year, with the COP being in Brazil, it will have its own challenges, but as it is the turn of Latin America and the Caribbean to host, it's important that the Caribbean part is not forgotten there. And I think it's a great opportunity for the region to be at the forefront and to really take that message of SIDS there. The year after, we're supposed to be seeing the COP in Australia, and Australia, if they are going to host, have said that they would like this to be a Pacific COP. and put Pacific voices really at the forefront there, which I do hope will be the case. So every year is different, and I think it's really important that we acknowledge that there is a need for funding. It's very expensive to get people to the COP in the first place. Even just the practicality of getting hotels, and there is always this rush to buy hotels and Airbnbs to crank up the prices around COP. And so for delegates to try and attend, it's very challenging. Flights get very expensive, especially if you're coming from, I think some of our delegates, it took them 3 days to get there. But that being said, I think what we were trying to do was to provide this platform with the Island Voices Network that helped COP reach voices, and also for people who were not there in person to be able to have some input or some sense of what was going on beyond the negotiation rooms. Because for me, the negotiations, of course, are the core of COP, and that's what we see as, the origin of it. But now there are so many partnerships and um, outcomes that come out of this wider event that I think are really important. And as was discussed before, this is really an opportunity for island representatives from many different regions from around the world to be in the same place and share their experiences. And there was one session, one of the youth sessions that was chaired by our colleague Vincent, where we had representatives from the Maldives, from Singapore, from the Pacific, from the Caribbean, I think from some other regions as well. He asked me to stop inviting people because we kept adding more people, but it was so exciting to have so many people from representing so many different regions sharing those experiences on stage. And I think that that is part of the value of this event.
Thank you, James. And I'm now seeing questions coming in from David. Which island nations have governments that are more supportive of sustainable development and present the least barriers to permitting industrial development? He's from Barbados. Would you like to explore investment opportunities in this country? I think this is a conversation that we could have in regards to investment opportunities and what investment opportunities are available, especially with the Global Sustainable Island Summit coming up in St. Kitts and Nevis. So that is something that you could look forward to, David. All right, moving on to Luca. My name is Luca Stevenson from Brazil, and I'm truly inspired by all of your actions and contributions at COP29. Thank you for your speeches. My question concerns how the young leaders effectively participated in the events and highlighted the specific problems of their home countries. Also, how did participating in COP29 inspire you to continue working towards your goals in influencing climate change? Uh, I will put this forward to the CCJLA participants. Noel, take a shot.
Sure. So I'd say that as far as achieving your goals, in some instances, when you're participating in like panel discussions, they kind of give you an idea or at least subject matter of what that panel discussion is going to be about. So kind of the night before, I'd sit down and figure out maybe 3 objectives that I wanted to focus on for that panel discussion. And just to ensure that I was getting that information out with any question that I was asked. Of course, people can ask a question, but you don't necessarily have to answer or give them the answer that they're looking for. So you can always tailor what you say to getting your message out.
Great, thanks, Noel. Tara?
So definitely participating in panels are a very effective platform, as Noel would have highlighted, to share our perspective or different realities. We would have had, as Michaela referenced, one on coastal issues and how we as young people could contribute to that. Earlier in COP, we would have had a discussion moderated by Grace on intergenerational, how the different generations could work together. So the panels is definitely one way, and the media interviews, I think something I'm always encouraged by at COP is how the media, gives a special focus on young people and the global south. So all of us here would have had, many different media interviews. So that is always a great panel as it relates to being inspired. As I said a bit earlier on, it's really networking and building connections to see how we could build on the work that we are already doing, but also create, new opportunities for working together. And I could see that I've already, been chatting with people that I would have met at COP just about the work I'm doing, but perhaps we could maybe do online stuff if there are geographical barriers, a way that, I could find more support for projects that I'm doing or have ideas for. So I think it's a useful space. You have to be really strategic and very realistic with what you are doing at COP, and that makes your strategy a bit better on how to be purposeful in this space. Because of course there are the negotiations and so on that are going on, which is very important. And sometimes we may have relationship with our negotiators and so on, and be able to share our perspectives, but realistically in that space, it's building a foundation for action, which is I think a very important word we need to start incorporating into the discussions surrounding COP actions, because I think we already know what are the problems and in some way the solutions, but we really have to, build a foundation for action.
Thanks, Tyrell. And we have one final question before we wrap up from Chelsea, which was also one of the CCJLA participants, but was unfortunate that she was not able to make it. What are your thoughts about the missed mark for commitment from decision makers yet again? How harder do we have to work now for climate justice? James, would you like to take this one?
Sure, I thought you'd throw me in for that one. I mean, it was disappointing. It was really disappointing, but also it wasn't surprising. I think was every year there is a goal, and I think because we're working with islands, we are very much focused on climate finance. There's also the conversation on mitigation, of course, which is very important, and reducing carbon emissions. But we're really looking at a lot on access to climate finance. And the amount that is needed is huge, and it's disappointing when you see the amount of money that is spent on wars, that is spent on other things, that this money cannot be brought in to be spent on something that affects so many people. But I say not surprising because, again, trying to get 200 people into a room, 200 not people, 200 countries, representatives into a room to agree on something is going to be challenging. And even this target, for many of the countries, got pushed back from their own local politics. I think that COP is a very imperfect, to put it mildly, process, but it's also the only process that we have right now. And so, although I do respect people who have stepped away from that, and especially I think there's a lot of criticism that is justified for the people, for the increased infiltration of the fossil fuel industry. I think that really needs to be looked at and called out when it happens. My personal belief is that we should work to improve this process, and that COP is kind of the best hope that we have of getting something. But I'm hoping that next year we'll see a higher participation of civil society. We won't see this continued increase of fossil fuel interest, which is worrying. But there is process, and I think the fact that this is every progress, the fact that this is every year, sometimes that progress seems painfully slow, especially I'm sure for people living on the front lines who are really seeing this. I completely respect that. But there is some progress, and we need to kind of see that too. So it's a really difficult one. And I think the message is, I know, keep fighting, and everyone who is here and is doing that good work and who was there on the ground and is able to do that, you know, the work is important, and not to get disheartened because the fact that an agreement occurred at all, everyone who was there contributed in some way to that, which was really important.
Thanks, James. And stemming from what James just said, Nigel, what steps can youth-led initiatives take to transition COP outcomes into tangible community actions?
I think it's also really important to keep involving the youth. I think there's an aspect sometimes of tokenism that we have in these spaces where they just use youth as a check mark, but to actually involve youth in decision-making process, actually walk like walk the talk, because sustainability actually means taking care of the next generation. And as we, the youth, are the next generation, you have to involve us in important stakeholder meetings or also decision-making processes. So I think for the future and the now is to keep involving the youth, but also actively letting them participate and engage in dialogues, these decision-making processes, and also negotiations. I think having youth perspective in negotiations or decision making, I think it's something that's always missing. It's not there yet, but it can be there. So I think once you have youth advocates and activists and youth climate change people that work in organizations in regards to climate change that are also youth led, I think that's really important step to move forward, but to also actively engage and let people participate, yet let the youth participate in these decision making process, which can give you a better perspective on what sustainability actually is, because you are hearing the person that is going to be be mostly disproportionately affected by climate change. So I think have us be at the table, have us negotiate, have us make decisions, have us there and actively participate in discussions, and you'll actually see results once you make us a key stakeholder in climate change climate change conversations. So I think, yeah, I think that's my take on that as well.
Grace, I just
Thank
want
you,
to
Nigel.
jump in
Yes,
on
go
this
ahead,
one
James.
because I think what Nigel said is really important for youth, and I just wanted to underline for youth in small island states how
Mhm.
that is times 10 important, because the small island states at COP already are coming with very low resources and teams of sometimes half a dozen people or 3 or 4 people doing the work that, you know, large countries are sending hundreds of people to do. And it's amazing that you see youth delegates coming, and within 1 or 2 years, they are leaders of their national delegations. And even in their first year, they're able to really up their capacity. So it's just amazing how quickly that transition happens and how important it is that youth get that capacity building to add to their nation's own capacity to be able to have a role at COP.
I
Thanks,
agree.
James. And yes, all right. So we all summed it up, but now I want to just add one final questions for all of you to respond. Looking ahead to COP30, what should island nations prioritize to build on COP29 outcomes? I will start with Michaela.
I think it's really important to continue the conversations that we had at COP29. I don't think that these conversations should be paused after this COP. I think they need to be continued until the next COP and beyond. And I think we need to continue involving youth as we've expressed today, and really fostering collaboration and seeing how we can work together as islands regionally and internationally in the fight against climate change.
Thanks, Michaela. Ari?
Money. I think climate finance commitments is ultimately one of the biggest things that, the takeaways from this finance COP is that it's never enough, but I think there's definitely more that can be done. And I think they should focus on ensuring these financial commitments actually realized and implemented, particularly for developing nations and vulnerable communities like SIDS that we work with. And this includes operationalizing the loss and damage fund and mechanisms for accessing that funding.
Thank you, Ari. Now over to Noel.
I really do feel that collaboration is key. I'm not going to draw out my answer, but I do believe that all the island nations do need to have further collaboration, not just within the Caribbean, but of course those within the Pacific Islands. And, further, we need to gain as much information as we can so that we can make solidified decisions about what's happening within all of our environments and be able to really share and hit home that information to our national leaders and have our voices heard.
Great. Nigel?
I think for me, center Indigenous peoples in the dialogue as well. Invite the youth, pay your debts, Global North, pay your debts, and also talk about the main issue that caused climate change in the first place, which was colonialism. So once we actually talk about colonialism and the root of everything, of climate change and the disbalance with the connection with the land, I think that's something that we could like move forward to. But if we're not doing that, then we can't move forward the way we want to. So I think that's that. Yeah, centering Indigenous voices, youth voices, smaller island nation voices, but also decolonizing, talking about colonialism, and also reparations. The climate debt is very high, and I think we need financing, but also a dialogue, a proper dialogue about financing, and yeah, just the sense of togetherness. We're all in this storm together, but we have different boats, and my boat is sinking. So I think we just have to have a togetherness in this.
Thanks, Nigel. Tyrell?
Yeah, so to put it plainly, I think we need to go to COP30, meaning business. We need to mean business, and I think we need to go there with an action plan. We need to go there and show the global north why these new funding mechanisms need to be operationalized and why they need to up their commitments. We need to go there showing what we have already done, but what we are doing with our NDCs. I think it's time that COP really moves away from being talk to action, and we need to go there with our action plans to show why investing in climate finance is important and what we are going to do, what projects we are going to invest in, how we are really going to shape the realities on the ground for our communities. So there was a pavilion at COP29 called We Mean Business, I think it was. So we need to go to COP30 meaning business.
Thank you, Tyrell. And James, your final thoughts?
Final thoughts. It's hard to add anything to what was said. I mean, you all touched on those points, but I just wanted to underline that coalition building. I think for islands, having the resources to do it alone is always going to be challenging. But when you think about the power of those groups of islands coming together, whether it's the Caribbean as a region, as you all have mentioned, or SIDS as AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States, or even moving beyond that, we talked about the SNIJs and how other islands are now coming together to really have that voice of islands. I think that's really powerful, and those coalitions are really critical to working together because these same issues are being felt across the world by different people, and to fight those powers that do have the resources is a challenging one. So yes, stay tuned. There will be lots more to come.
Thank you, James, and thank you to all our panelists for your thoughtful reflections and to our audience for your engagement. Of course, COP29 was a critical platform for collaboration, particularly for island nations and youth advocates. The next steps involve translating discussions into action and preparing strategically for COP30. Of course, for more insights and upcoming events like the Global Sustainable Island Summit, which is put on by Island Innovation, it is being held in St. Kitts and Nevis in May 2025. So for more information on that, please visit the Island Innovation website. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to continuing this important work together.